Good afternoon, AV. Thanks for joining.
Hey Derek, thanks for having me.
And welcome to the Real American Dream podcast, where I certainly believe the American dream is alive, and that's primarily alive and well, actually, and primarily
Yeah,
because of the stories I hear from first generation immigrants such as yourself. So thanks for joining.
thank you for having me. Yes, it's definitely alive and kicking. I don't know why people say otherwise, so looking
I
forward to this.
agree.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting, and I feel like that's the kind of the apathy or that counter message is somewhat recent. So again, that's what drove me to do these podcasts, because I mean there's such fantastic stories of not only first generation immigrants but just people born in this country
hmm
that have achieved more than they ever could, and primarily a lot of that has to do with the opportunity here among other things. So hey, maybe a good place to start is, let's just start with your first name, last name, date of birth, and where you were born, and we'll go from there.
yeah. So my name is Abhijit Verekar. I just go by AV. Date of birth is August 6, 1981. I was born in what used to be Bombay, India, and grew up in Goa, India, which is like the Hawaii of India. Beautiful beaches, palm trees, warm weather all year round. So kind of a beach bum growing up.
Nice. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting. So I've been fortunate enough to travel the world, but I've never been to India. And India is actually, I mean, talk about growth, talk about population. I think there's some pretty, I mean, industry.
hmm
I think economically the country's doing really well. I mean, how was it? How was it for you? Maybe we start there. Like, that's
Yeah.
my perception, right? But
hmm
maybe give all of us a little bit of insight into how it was growing up in India, in Bombay.
So growing up in Goa was different. I mean, Goa was never a British colony. It was a Portuguese colony. So from the 1400s to 1961, when they left, we have a huge Portuguese influence on our language, food, culture.
Mhm.
So different from the rest of India. But my small little town, it was real tiny. We had two schools. My parents sent me to the one that was run by nuns, so I got a great education. My knuckles have recovered since then, but uh, I mean we weren't rich, but we weren't poor. I mean we talk about the poor in India. There's real poverty
Yeah.
in India, but raised well in a large family. Mom and dad are both business owners. Dad's a photographer. Mom owned a beauty salon, and we, you know, grew up real happy. Just a large family, aunts and uncles and cousins, you name it. Everywhere you looked, you were someone's cousin in that town. And then real fond memories just growing up in the summers, being off of school, eating tropical fruits. We had mango trees, coconuts, papayas in our backyard. Just would wake up, play some cricket, and forage and feed our bellies with fresh fruit. Go back home. So real cool upbringing. Very different from I guess my colleagues here in the U.S., but nevertheless blessed to have had that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's something I'd like to learn more about. I mean, you said there's a lot more poverty
Yeah.
in India than we experience here in the United States. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
So, you go to Bombay or Mumbai as it's called now, you'll see people begging on the streets, right? You've seen the movie Slumdog Millionaire. That wasn't made up. I mean, the movie part of it was, but um, how you see poverty, how you see the beggars and little kids just asking for a rupee or two just for something to eat.
Mhm.
Um, that's all very real. There is no social net. There is no social security. I mean, there wasn't when I was growing up. There is something that started now, but if you're poor, if you're destitute, if you're in the streets, it's really hard for people to come out of that.
Mhm.
And there is no unemployment offices you can go and get it's something to sustain yourself. There is no housing and urban development department that gives you Section 8 checks. There is none of that. You're on your own.
Yeah.
If you're poor, you're done. You're in the streets. It takes really um, some massive luck or someone giving you massive amounts of money or a leg up to get out of that kind of situation.
Interesting. So it almost seems like, and I think you kind of said it, or maybe I'm inferring, but you kind of had the really wealthy, and then you
Hmm.
probably have the really poor, not much in between. So
Yeah.
so I guess when you say luck, I mean to get ahead in India, maybe you have to be born into wealth, or maybe um, status, right? I'm sure status would be pretty important there, if I'm hearing you correctly, versus like how do you get from the bottom through the middle class to the top there?
So back when I was growing up, like that,
Yeah.
that was the case. So things changed rapidly in the 90s. 1991, India opens up its economy to the world, where they were very, um, you know, self-sustained. They tried to be self-sustained. They tried to be like, we don't want any foreign investments. We don't want any of that. We're going to be self-sustained. That didn't work out because their foreign reserves ran out in 1990, and the World Bank said, "Listen, we'll loan you some money, but you have to open up and let American firms, British companies come in and invest in India."
Mhm.
And that's when the real boom happened. So, as I was growing up, I was 10 years old in 91, and economy starts opening up. Of course, it then trickled down to, by the time I was getting out of college, my friends were getting good jobs for the time, right? You were working for an American firm in Bombay, answering phone calls at night. You were the guy checking up on your fridge warranty, or working for um, some state's unemployment office, just answering calls and going through the process. All of that started happening in the 90s, and that opened up the door for people to sort of get more education, get better paying jobs. Again, I would have done okay if I had lived in India. We weren't rich, but I had a good education. By the time I came here, I had a master's degree in accounting. I could have gotten a job. I could have become a CPA. All of that was available to me back there, and it's become better now, right? A lot of American institutions are in India, a lot of British institutions, international schools, a lot of the Indian business schools, technical schools are up there with the MITs and the Harvards of the world, right?
Mhm.
But it's so much more competitive because you have so many more people competing for the same slots. I mean, think about it. A country that it's the third of the size of the U.S. with three times the population, if not more. Um, so massive amounts of competition for to get ahead in those areas.
Interesting, interesting. So what year did you come to the States?
It was 2004.
Okay, so 2004. How old were you in
I
2004?
I was 22. I
22.
just turned
Okay.
22.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So so growing up in India, what was your perception of the States? And I
yeah.
think it's such an interesting question because obviously the podcast is about first generation immigrants coming to the United States,
Hmm.
achieving more than they thought they could ever achieve. But certainly I'd love to understand like what everybody thought of the United States and what was the allure and the excitement, and why the United States? Why not some European country or something in Asia, etc.?
See, the myth of the United States was prevalent, meaning we grew up watching Die Hard and Rambo and Commando, favorite movies in my household, right? My grandfather had cassettes of Rambo and Commando, and we would watch them on repeat. um, we had relatives that had come here as doctors and engineers and had done well, and every time you met some of them, they would say, if you're smart, if you work hard, if you do what you're supposed to do and just put your back into it, you can make something of yourself. There is no corruption. There is no, one-upmanship. Um, you as an individual can really take advantage of the opportunities that the society has to offer, that the government has to offer, that community has to offer. To just, if you put yourself into it, you're gonna succeed. Um, it's almost a guarantee, right?
Right.
Compare that to how society was, at least when I was in India. Lots of corruption, um, uh, more competition for, like I said, those coveted seats in those massive institutions of world renown, um, there wasn't this sense of I can do anything in this place.
Mm,
There was a sense of I can do anything if I do some other things along
mm,
with it, right?
mm,
Um, the US was, and I didn't know this at the time, right? I've learned since that Reagan said this about the state, the shining city on the hill.
mhm,
To somebody in India, and it still is. The whole perception that the U.S. has been and no one wants to come here anymore. That's not true. Uh, but especially back then, it was what do I want to do with my life? And I don't know when or how this happened. I set this goal that I want to go to the States to take a chance at it, to take a chance at the dream, to take a chance at let's see what I'm made of. That
yeah.
really was it. It was a teenage boy saying, "Yeah, I can do these things here, but what's
Mhm.
what can I do in the world?" And I chose the U.S.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was actually just in LA with a buddy of mine, and we were at this bar having a drink, and I met this guy from France, and he's like an executive coach, and he moved from I think Paris to New York, then to LA. So he's been in the States 8 years, and I asked him that same question, like why the United States, and it's back to what I commonly hear. A lot of it dates back to like Hollywood and what everybody saw on
Yeah,
TV. And you know
yeah,
what he said? It kind of resonated. He's like, Americans are great storytellers.
hmm
And I'm like, well, what do you mean specifically? And he's like, well, look at Hollywood. Look at all these great stories that Hollywood, puts on, via the movies and these great stories that tell like what America is and this and that. And it's funny. I mean, a lot of people I interview on this podcast, when I ask that question, it goes back to the movies in Hollywood, right?
yeah. And
Um,
TV, friends. I mean,
TV,
my
yeah,
God, I want to be 20 something living with my friends in New York City.
yeah,
It didn't
exactly.
happen for me, but
Yeah.
it was the I don't know, hard to explain. But I think the more I think of it, it is the American dream. What can
Mhm.
you make of yourself given all of this opportunity available to you? And that's what happened with me.
So, okay, so let's fast forward a little bit, right? You're 22 years old. I think at that point you said you're already well educated, right? I think you
Yeah.
said your master's degree and
Uh-huh.
undergraduate.
Yep.
So so I guess it doesn't sound like maybe you were, but it doesn't sound like you were really leaving anything. But you were really trying to go to make something more of yourself. Is that accurate?
That is very accurate. Yeah. I mean, I could have done so much in India. I actually had a company I started at 18, building
Mhm.
websites for people when people didn't have computers. So slightly mistimed, but there was that opportunity
Mhm.
in the early 2000s. Startup scene, the technology scene was just starting to come up, and India was about to become this powerhouse in terms of software development
Mhm.
and consulting and things like that, which they have done. Um, so I had a choice between do I go this way and just stay in India and pursue careers there, or follow my American dream, and I chose to do that. And it's my personality too. I'll take the riskier route to see what happens,
Yeah.
rather than the safe one.
So, okay, so 22 years old. Where do you and you've never been to the United States prior to that, or you haven't?
No,
Yeah.
never,
So
never.
basically you picked up,
Yeah,
you had your whatever your belongings you brought with you, and where
yeah.
did you go in the States? Where'd you start?
Yeah, so there was a process, right?
Yeah.
It's not easy to come to the States. This is the other misconception, right? That people are just showing up and border guards are letting you in. Maybe so in some areas, but if you want to come in as a student or as a professional, it's near to impossible, and
Mhm.
very few people make that cut. Yeah. And multiple factors, right? Do you have the funds available? Do you have the education? Did you say the right things in the college application? Did you say the right things to the immigration official? So all of those hoops have to be jumped. So I had to prepare for it, like get the GRE, take the GMAT, take TOEFL to prove that I can speak English, and after that, apply to schools, apply for a visa, go to a visa interview where they grilled me. Like, why, why do you want to go to the
Mhm.
States? What guarantees that you'll come back, that you're not going to be an immigrant?
Mhm.
Um, all sorts of things. And I got through all of that. That took about 2 years.
Wow.
And um, the way things lined up is I ended up at Cleveland State University in Ohio for an MBA. Two suitcases. Of course, that's the cliche with immigrants, right? But that's all you're allowed to bring. You have to pay for the third one. So even if I had stuff, I would have had to pay for the third suitcase.
Hmm.
Um, and just packed up and came to from tropical Goa to frigid, about to be frigid Cleveland, Ohio. And I had relatives that were in the area, so in my mind, I would stay there and go to class, and when I found a job, I would find my own place. But you know how it is, the cities and the suburbs. As an immigrant, I had no concept. I thought everyone was in the Cleveland area.
Yeah.
It was like a good 45 to 1 hour bus, bike ride, train, a combination of things. So I did that for a couple of months, and I was like, I need to find my place by the school.
Mhm.
And of course, I only had enough money, borrowed money, to last me a semester. So as soon as that ran out, I had to go find a job. But anyway, back to your question, Cleveland, Ohio was where I landed first with,
Okay.
with my two
Interesting.
suitcases. Yeah.
So what, like, take me through your thought process. I mean, look, you've been growing up watching Rambo and all these movies in Hollywood, and the glamorous side of all things United States.
Yeah.
And, you know you get to Cleveland, right? And I'm in Columbus, and I love Ohio. But certainly, coming from, across the world to Cleveland, I mean, what were your initial thoughts? You land in Cleveland, here you are in this
Yeah.
city, and was your perception different than reality, I guess?
It was somewhere in the middle. I mean,
Yeah.
I think 2002, Cleveland wasn't that cool. You know,
Yeah.
it's always been a cool city, but recently, if you've been to Cleveland, it's really come along.
Yeah.
So, my first thought ever in the U.S., as soon as I get out of the airport, is where are all the people? What happened here? Because
Hmm.
I'm just used to the bustle, and there's everybody, there's people on the streets, there's cows and dogs, and it was a shocking feeling to not see people,
Hmm.
like I had seen in India. And then things were quiet. It
Yeah.
was like almost like you were wearing noise canceling headphones, like you couldn't hear a thing. Whereas in India, there's everyone's honking all the time. There's people talking, and of course, it's a factor of how many people there are and how many cars on the roads, things like that. So those were my first couple of thoughts as soon as I got out of the airport. And then as I spent some time here, it was like there's no pollution and the sun seems brighter. The sky
Hmm.
seems blue, right? It seems poetic, but these are my very initial thoughts about this. The grass seems greener. Things are so clean.
Hmm.
Basic things that we take for granted now
Hmm.
were so refreshing and new and beautiful. I just remember being like in awe of every little thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool. That,
yeah,
that's really cool. Yeah. I mean, um, so Cleveland State, and then so if but you already so help me understand this. I mean, so you came over on a visa, a school visa,
hmm,
right?
yep.
Took you 2 years, but you're already highly educated. Like, why not? Why why come over that way? Was that the most efficient way to get here? Was school visa to get back into school? I mean, if you already had the education needed to maybe come over a different way and maybe
Yeah.
start a business, why that route? I'm curious.
That was the only
Okay.
viable route. I mean, there's other routes,
Mm-hmm.
but that was the most viable at the time. To come and
Interesting.
get a degree, and that opened the door for finding employment here and changing visas from a student visa to a work visa, and then so on and so forth.
Interesting. Okay. So what, did you do 2 years at Cleveland State?
Year and a half.
Okay.
Yeah, I was done with that degree pretty quickly. And I then got an internship that led to a job, and that's how I entered the work market, and really that was my first real job. Like I've dabbled in business and I've worked with my dad's company and did all of that, but my first real job was in the States. But
Okay.
it took some doing. Like I said, I ran out of money.
Hmm.
First semester, I'm done. I realized, okay, now it's time to go look for a job. While I was in grad school, I was a tutor. I was a TA in the finance department at Cleveland State, and then I also worked at the mall. I sold cell phone accessories and perfume. I was one of those guys at the kiosk
Yeah.
asking to see your phone, and then of course those things paid for my rent and living expenses, um, and when my roommate at the time said, "Hey, my company is hiring interns. They're gonna pay real money, $38,000 a year." I'm like, "Let's do it. Let's do it."
Yeah. 38. That's awesome. So what kind of, so you were an intern, what kind of business was it?
It was a consulting business.
Okay.
It was tech consulting, but with a business process and strategy kind of bent,
Hmm.
where they helped clients modernize and think strategically, redesign organizations. So I got to use a lot of my previous
Hmm.
education with the MBA, and just like it was like solving puzzles all day. It was fun.
Nice. So hey, maybe you could, like, let's kind of walk you through. I mean, that was years ago. That was roughly, gosh, a little under 20 years ago, maybe 15 to 17 years ago, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
It,
looks
yeah.
like you've come a long way. I mean,
Yeah.
from Goa to the student visa to Cleveland State,
Yeah.
to getting some additional education here in the United States, to an internship. Where are you at now? What are you doing? And how'd you build to where you are?
Oh man, that's a long story. So I'm
Yeah.
still in the same sort of sphere of business that I was back 16 years ago. Um,
Hmm.
so I worked with that. So the internship led to in within 7 years, I became the CEO of that company in Cleveland. Uh,
Wow.
long story again. I wasn't the smartest guy in the room, but I stuck through some tough times with the firm. The owner decides to retire and says, "Hey, you should probably run this place now." Um, there was some strings attached. Things didn't work out, and I ended up going to another firm. Spent a couple of years there trying to build their government consulting practice, and then in 2016 I started my own firm, Rivero. And we just turned 6 years old, still here, employ about 30 to 35 people, do
Mhm.
business all over the country, and it's just been a great ride
Mhm.
the whole way. I mean, I couldn't have done this 18 years ago when I first came to the States. I had to go through the grind a lot to have the confidence in 2016 to say, all right, I'm going to do this on my own now.
So have you gone and got your citizenship? Have you made that decision?
Yes. So last year, I finally got my citizenship in
Mhm.
2021 January, and it was expedited. So let me back up. So student visa, work visa, and if you're on a work visa, it's not easy to just get a citizenship. You have to like apply for a green card. You have to find a sponsor, work sponsor that sort of backs you and says, "Hey, I need this person in the country." Um, and like there's years I would have been still in that process, which had been started by my previous employer, if I hadn't met my wife Susan. So
Okay.
meet Susan in 2016, and 2016 was a big year. Started the company, met her, married her, and because I married a U.S. citizen, my
Mhm.
timeline was expedited. Right.
Gotcha.
So but even still, it took 5 years to citizenship. So Jan 21, I took my oath, and it was fantastic. It was a great moment in
Yeah,
my
how was that experience for you? For me, it was pretty moving.
Yeah.
Because I immigrated from Canada,
Yeah.
and we had our permanent residency, we had a green
Hmm.
card, and I just kept renewing it. So
Yeah.
finally, I'm just like, you know what? I feel more American than I am Canadian.
Yeah.
And I went through took the test and did all the biometrics, all that stuff, and then went and got sworn in. And when I got sworn in, I was actually pretty emotional because the country's given me so much.
Hmm.
But I kept thinking back to like my mother for some reason, like she basically raised four kids on her own. We came to the United States that way, and through hard work, determination, and some grit. I mean, she was successful and we were, right? So, but it was a pretty moving experience for me. How was it? How was it for you?
Very similar. Just I was so exhausted by the whole process, right?
Yeah.
That over the years, again, just to keep your student visa and your work visas, and then the green card applications, and the through the marriage thing, it was an exhausting, expensive process. Like I could probably stack this whole room with paperwork. So when that letter finally came, that you have to show up in Nashville to take your oath on a certain day.
Hmm.
Um, it was exhilarating, and it was also very it was like a weight had lifted from my shoulder because I wanted to be an American citizen ever since I came here, ever since I wanted to come here. Not that I don't like India, it will always be my you know home mother country, and they don't recognize dual citizenship, so I had to renounce Indian citizenship.
Hmm.
um, but it was surreal and very satisfying. It was like this long journey had come to an end. But as soon as you take that oath, the responsibility of being an American citizen also strikes you, right? It's not something to take lightly. It's something to hold and cherish and keep for the rest of your life. Um, but also thankfulness, really real gratitude for
Yeah.
what the country had given me, mostly opportunities, and a sense of deep pride in finally having that paper to
Yeah.
prove what I felt inside
Hmm.
for more than 15 years. It's hard to explain. I know
Yeah.
you feel the same too. It's like, dang it, I'm American. I don't have the paper to show it, but I think and feel and act.
Yeah.
I
Well,
can, and
talk
I have
about
done so for a long time. So come on, let's do this. And
I
there it
just
was.
love that spirit too,
Yeah.
right? And I see it, and I talk to first generation immigrants, and I specifically like talking to first generation immigrants because they weren't born here, so there's a trek to get here.
Hmm.
And look, some are easier than others,
Yeah.
but if you think of what it took you to get to where you are today, I mean that to me is the American spirit. I mean, look, I mean, we all grew up hearing that, look, if you're a good person and you're kind and you work hard, you show a little bit of gratitude, a little bit of ingenuity, some innovation along the way, you can do whatever you want in this country. And it's funny, and I've said this in other podcasts actually, my wife's grandfather's he came from Italy, and he always says, in other countries you do what you can, but in the States you do what you want. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
if you want it, the
Yeah.
system is set up for you to be successful.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh
so
yeah.
um, so yeah, I can imagine you going through that process and finally seeing an American citizen. You probably felt a part of something, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Very
so
much so.
I'm curious, right? I mean, look, you spent 22 years in India, so you've got a pretty good fundamental understanding of how India works. I mean, why are there so many stories that are just like yours where people don't come with a ton but do all the right things and are successful and are married, kids, citizens, great jobs? I mean, what is it about America in your mind that allows for that?
I think there's no catch. I mean, really, it's when you say there's opportunity to be grabbed at every corner,
Hmm.
um, there really is no catch. Like it's true. Um, and 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 I'll cry myself hoarse, trying to say that to people that don't believe in that.
Hmm.
I think that's the fundamental reason because, again, going back to, and again, forgive me if you're listening to this in India of today. I don't know. That was 18 years ago that I was there. But there were a lot of gotchas, you know. You may have the grades and you may have the brain power to get into a fancy institution, but, grease some palms here and there. You
Yeah.
should know, your uncle should know somebody in the selection committee. I know that happens here too, but it's not prevalent.
Yeah.
There is no gotcha. It's pretty straightforward. Um,
Yeah, that's
you
interesting.
go
That goes back to what you said earlier about the corruption, right? I mean,
Yeah,
because that's, essentially it's, you know, what you were used to in India is, kind of the back door, right?
yeah,
Yeah, in America, there's I think there's a certain level of like fairness here. There really is. You
yeah.
know what I mean? And I think the way our government was set up probably allows for that as well. I mean, specifically, the way our founders set up, how we structure the government is power should reside with the people and government should act as the servant to the people, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
And I think in a lot of countries that's flip-flopped,
it is.
where there's centralized power, where where wealth is, and then everybody else is just trying to get there, right? So I think
Hmm.
in my opinion, I think the game might be fairer here than a lot of other countries. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think so too. I think that's what I was getting at too. Like,
Yeah.
it is a level playing ground if you follow the rules and give it your best shot.
Hmm.
It really is. There is no other way around it, really. The best way through, to success is through the process.
Hmm.
No matter what route you take, no matter what your level of ambition is, you can do it, or you also have the opportunity of trying your hardest and failing. There's the other thing too, right? As an entrepreneur, um, you're not guaranteed anything. Forget success, you're not guaranteed the next paycheck or what have
Hmm.
you, but you have the opportunity to put your best foot forward at all
Hmm.
times.
Yeah. So one question I haven't asked in a while, but I want to get your thoughts on it is, and it was something that was important to me and my family when we got here, but was assimilation, right?
Hmm.
Into American values, traditions. We found that to be very important.
Yeah.
But also one thing I love about this country is, the ultimate freedom in some respects where you don't necessarily have to do that, right? And you think of, freedom of religion and just freedom of speech and all these things that are fundamentally American. You can do whatever you'd like, right?
Hmm.
But you being here for a decent amount of time, you're married. I mean, did you ever put some thought into like when you got here, maybe like, hey, it'd be good to assimilate or
Yeah.
maybe not. I'm just curious on that.
Yeah. Gosh, man, um, I was dying to explore and assimilate.
Yeah.
Again, not saying I wanted to, leave my culture behind. I haven't. Um, but at a large urban school like Cleveland State, you had people from every country imaginable that were in my international class, and I remember making the conscious choice to go explore, go hang out with the French guys, and go hang out with the Armenians and the Egyptians, and just to like learn about the world, and which is what America is, right?
Hmm.
You've all come from somewhere, and here we are, and that that conscious effort has helped me assimilate.
Yeah.
So not just was I hanging out with the international folks, I was hanging out with the Americans who were in my class or at school or in social organizations, um, and I would turn down, um, like Indian cultural events if there was a conflict. I'm like, I
Hmm.
can do that in India. That's not why I came here. I'm
Hmm.
here to explore and embrace and experience America in its glory, and I think that helped a lot too. Just assimilation is very important. I think you
Hmm.
can. I think there's a place for holding on to your culture, and that's again what makes America great. Is it's a melting pot. Um, I don't know, maybe melting pot isn't the word. It's like different threads in the same blanket, right? You have different colors and different backgrounds and different material that makes America. And I got a chance to do that in Cleveland State. I mean, I would have, if I were in the Bay Area or New York, probably would have been 10 times uh, more
Yeah.
magnitude of the cultural experience. But Cleveland wasn't bad.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I mean, America is so diversified, and certainly there
Yeah.
are other cities that were probably more right
Yeah.
than Cleveland. So that's pretty interesting. You know, I'm curious your thoughts on this. Again, the reason why I started the podcast was to share these stories, right?
Mm.
Hey, you can be successful, and this country, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and it's all about personal responsibility,
Hmm.
and it's about ownership, accountability, right? And then just, maximum effort, right?
Yeah.
And I believe all those things combined, I mean, that a lot of, that kind of is that first generation immigrant, or all those things in one. But yet we still have, in my mind, a lot saying, look, what did I got a quote the other day? It's like, they call it the American dream because you only get it when you're sleeping. Something like that, right? So you've got kind of the naysayers. Why do you think that is? I mean, have we not heard enough stories, like AVs and others? I mean, why do you think there's that sentiment right now?
I think um, you're right. There isn't enough positive connotation to immigration on either side of the political
Sure.
spectrum, right? Um, um, I think we need to tell more stories like this. And look, when I say positive immigration, I don't have a sad story that I didn't escape war, I didn't escape famine, I
Mhm.
wasn't escaping anything. I'm very clear about that. I could have done well in India,
Mhm.
maybe not as well, but coming here um, gave me something that I would not have had in India. That it made me put my back to the wall. I had no other choice. I
Yeah.
had no choice but to succeed, right? And that's in many other occasions in my life, that's been the catapult for me. I don't want to be there again, but when I am back to the wall, like this, that's when I perform. So I think the perception is sort of shaky right now because people expect to have the level of success that, let's say, an AV has, without putting the work into it or without having the opportunity to have their backs to the wall. Like, what have you risked today to get ahead? How
Mhm.
have you put yourself in a tough situation to get ahead? Um, and that's what immigrants have to do. And I think I would have missed that. I would have done well, but to a very small degree because I would have had family and people to back me and just like entitlement to fall back on, right? I didn't have that. So those are the stories that need to be told of successful immigrants that came here and we didn't get anything. We had the
Mhm.
same playing field as the rest of us did, but we had no other choice.
Yeah.
But back to the connotation of the American dream being dead is terrible. I dislike it very much so because no matter what you read in the media or on social media or traditional, you go anywhere in the world, even to our enemies, they want to come here. They want to have this life. And
Mhm.
the fact that they can't makes them, it's sour grapes.
Yeah.
It really is. And that sort of comes back to our population here, and people are disillusioned.
Yeah. That's so interesting too. I think you're dead on how, like, having your back against the wall, you don't have a choice. And the first generation immigrant generally comes here, and that's that situation they're in. The
Yeah,
choice is succeed because there is no other choice, right?
there isn't.
And then also, I think what resonated right there was risk. You got to take risks, and if you take good calculated risks in this country, from an entrepreneurial perspective, if you go get access to capital to get yourself educated, you build some debt. Like there's some good returns, but you can't sit back.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be willing to take the risk and put yourself out there to go succeed. And I think you're that story. That's why this conversation, I really like it because, look where you were, Cleveland State, visa, to get your graduate degree, and then, nowhere else to go, but okay, let me start with an internship, right? I have to be successful here. Because of that, you get to the highest level of that organization.
Mm-hmm.
Then over time, look where you are now, having your business, you're married, and a lot of that is because at one point you learned that you couldn't go back, right? I have to learn how to press forward. And I think I think that is kind of the first generation, that's the spirit, first generation immigrant spirit for sure.
Yeah. And I wish we could teach that, right? I mean, I'm sure someone will figure it out or has, I don't know.
Mhm.
But that fighting spirit, that there is no choice. And I think founding fathers, right?
Yeah.
What was there? You flipped off the king and said, "We're going to start our own country." What option did you have but to
Mhm.
fight through and make it happen?
Yeah. That's
That
very
that
true.
that those are our roots.
Yeah. So I'm curious, back to the conversation a second ago, what would you, let's say, let me back up. There's several people just like you waiting in line to come to this country, right?
Yeah.
Years, investment in cash, process, applications, right? And I think you said it earlier, like it's overwhelming and it's kind of a weight to go through all
Mhm.
that, a weight on your shoulders.
Mhm.
Yet people are still doing that, right? But the ones there's people so willing to do that, but there's still people saying you shouldn't. But what do you say to the ones that are in line? Why should they still come? What would you message to them?
I mean, it's worth it,
Yeah.
right? You put in all that work, and get through on the other side. The work doesn't stop, but
Mm-hmm.
the work itself is worth it. You
Yeah.
you put hopefully you don't have to put 15, 18 years to gain citizenship. Of course, that's not the end goal. That's the prize for
Yeah.
having gone through that process. Uh, but it's worth it. It's still worth it today. Like look at our labor force. I wish immigration was easier. I wish we would make it um, points based like Canada has or Australia or the UK has, where your skill set gives you a better position in the line.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas what we have today, what I went through is you're back there with everyone else.
Yeah.
So I think we need to make it better. But for those in line today, it's absolutely worth it. Is what
Mhm.
my um, sort of wisdom would be,
Yeah. And then
having
what do
gone
you,
through it.
and then if what would you say to those that completely disagree with you? Right. You kind of gave it a little bit earlier. I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean,
they're just flat out wrong.
yeah, it's
Body
fine.
gonna
Stay,
feel that.
yeah,
Yeah.
stay where you are. I mean, look, there's I'll stick to this. Everyone that has ever heard of the US in a positive way, meaning this is the place you come to make something of yourself, have the opportunities, work hard, make the connections, do it.
Hmm.
Those people will do it. Those that believe in that sort of path will go for it, even if they fail.
Yeah.
And I know many that have, right? Um, and those that think that's too much work will come up with stories to say that's not worth it. That doesn't work anymore.
Hmm.
Um, you don't know until you've jumped in the water how
Yeah.
cold it is.
Yeah. Well, AV, this is I just love your story. And in fact, you're the first one I've had on from India. And look, back to kind of the whole theme, it's I can definitely see why you've been successful, why you've achieved everything you've wanted to achieve in this country. And I think the country is lucky to have productive people like you. And look, I appreciate you coming on the episode, and sharing your story. And any last words before we close down the podcast?
No, man. Thanks for having me. Look, I'll say that I've made my story seem like it was easier, but it's definitely easier than some of your other guests that have
Sure.
escaped war and famine, and I can't imagine what that was like, right? They probably didn't even come here with two suitcases. I was lucky to have that.
Yeah.
So thanks for having me. And I think the positive uh, immigration stories of people that just want a better life and can fight and work through it, are very powerful. And um, shame on those that say the American dream is dead. It's not. It's thriving.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for joining the Real American Dream podcast, AV, and we wish you all the best. Thank you.